The group had finally reached the swamps. Water was plentiful here, so Bernard scouted out ahead as the rest went down the slope to fill up their bottles. They had been walking for many hours, so a quick drink was a welcome gift. The water, of course, would need to be purified first. As they were heading further into the marshes, Matthew pointed out he saw a stash of goods lying in the open. When they got close and inspected the assembled stuff, they realized it were mostly empty barrels, boxes, and some tools. A little further inland, Sarah and Louis noticed a weird-looking patch of dirt where it looked like something had been buried. With the shovel that was stashed at the boxes, Matthew dug up the hidden items, which turned out to be 2 big backpacks with food and medicine and an armored vest. They gave the medicine to Sarah. The 2 backpacks went to Seon and Matthew, and Roxanne received the body armor. As there might be more hidden stuff around, the group spread out a bit to cover more ground. While Jennifer was searching the perimeter, she had no idea that 2 wild dogs snuck up on her. With loud roars they attacked her, Jennifer's screams alarming the rest as Roxanne and Louis ran to her aid. The dogs attacked her arms and legs, and lucky for Jennifer, the dogs shifted their attention to Louis as she staggered away. But Louis and his wife were armed, and as one of the dogs ran towards them both, they could easily put it down. The remaining dogs seemed a lot more rabid and wild, as it needed many bullets before finally falling down to the ground. Blood was dripping down Jennifer's leg. Sarah rushed in to look at the situation. The wound needed to be disinfected and stitched. Sarah tried her best to do it there on the spot, but Louis urged her to bandage it up for now, as other people might have heard the shots. The group continued at a slower pace than usual for Jennifer to keep up. The car wrecks and flat terrain made it difficult for Bernard to spot effectively. As they headed further, Louis's worry indeed proved right, as an armed car with shifty characters approached. They shouted that the group needed to stop, as their faces were hidden behind helmets and masks. 2 more gathered at the car and addressed the group directly, telling them that they would be taken to their camp. If they refused or resisted, they would be shot. Then suddenly from the side of the road, a different group attacked them by surprise. In response, those members who were armed fired as well, as the hectic battle quickly came to an end when the group emerging from the side of the road set the car ablaze with Molotovs. The car exploded, leaving nothing but limbs and organ tissue on the ground around it. One man that seemed to be leading the group that came to their aid introduced himself as Omar. He said Roxanne and the others were lucky they were around, otherwise they would have been taken to the camp of the Blue Trojans. None of the members knew who the Blue Trojans were, and Omar offered to explain everything, but not here. The smoke from the wreck might draw attention, and he offered to escort them to his camp where there would be food, shelter, and water. Omar genuinely seemed like a good person, and the group accepted his invitation. The camp itself was not too far, and lay next to a small creek. On the way to the camp, Omar explained a bit more about the Blue Trojans. They were one of the dominant groups in Crater City, and had branched out in areas around there. The few they ran into on the road belonged to the camp stationed farthest out. They were notorious for stealing from strangers and sometimes killing them. But there were even worse groups out there in the wasteland that made the Blue Trojans look like mere infants. Omar told them that they could stay the night. Jennifer could get her wound stitched, and the others could get some shut-eye. The beds were dirty and uncomfortable, but were preferred over sleeping on the ground. Omar's group was well organized and had lots of food, sodas, and other provisions. They always had a source of water nearby as well, and even had several working cars at their disposal. When night came, there was finally some room again for pleasantries. Bernard shared some cigarettes with a member of Omar's group and exchanged stories about the time they served. Bucky was immediately loved by all members, as many had not seen a friendly animal in months. Around the lit-up barrels, people warmed themselves and got to know each other. They shared with Omar's members that they were heading to Crater City in order to eventually get to Valhalla. It felt nice to be in good company again since the time they were at William's outpost. But inside, a more serious tone was set as Omar asked if Roxanne and the group would help in an attempt to overthrow the Blue Trojans in the area. Their camp was at the bridge, and they would only grant access to fellow Trojans. They were armed and had set up a blockade. Omar wanted to free up the road and access to the bridge again. The bridge itself led closer to Crater City, meaning its access was of value for Roxanne and the group. They had lookouts and snipers set up, but Bernard's sniping expertise could handle that, and there was the element of surprise, as no one dared to imagine a head-on assault. Omar did not have any more helmets or armor to spare, but he did have plenty of weapons he was willing to share. After a small discussion, the group agreed to help Omar in exchange for his kindness and shelter. The next morning, Omar gathered everyone to give them the final details. They would be accompanied by 2 armed cars in order to pin down the enemy and take care of their own vehicles. Bucky and Jennifer would stay at the camp, as she was still not able to move well. The rest headed out, with only Omar and a handful of soldiers remaining to keep the camp secure. As expected, the Trojans had their guard down, as they did not notice Bernard getting into position. Within seconds, the assault on the Trojan camp began, with the armed cars opening fire. In the blind panic during the first few seconds, casualties were felt on both sides. But the Trojans quickly found themselves at a disadvantage, as they were constantly fired upon by the cars and infantry. Some desperately tried to run to their own armed vehicles, but were killed before reaching it, or shot moments after getting in the car. A few members of Omar's group had fallen as well, but they had still the winning hand. Most enemy troops were killed, and stragglers were taken care of by Bernard, who carefully chose his targets. More cars arrived to reinforce the Trojans, and their presence was definitely felt by the group. But the Blue Trojans had yet to bear their best card, as a truck armed with artillery was approaching. The group saw it coming from the distance, but were unsure what they were seeing. Once the artillery was in position, it immediately started punishing the attackers. The truck shifted a bit to get a better spot, and the result was horrible. The group lost both armed cars and a large amount of Omar's men in an instant, and was forced to retreat. The Trojan artillery did not intend on allowing them to flee, as more men were shot in the back as they ran away. The assault was a failure. Bernard also retreated as he headed up the hill. The truck went ahead and pursued the fleeing group members. One of Omar's men led them to a nearby forest and urged them to stay clear of the field, as they had planted mines there in case a desperate situation like this would ever arise. And indeed, the truck tried to cut them off by heading straight through the field, only to explode and put an abrupt stop to the chase. Back at Omar's camp, the remaining people awaited the return of the soldiers. The defeated looks and small number of those returning said enough. Bucky was happy to see his buddy again. The men debriefed Omar, saying the assault was a failure, even though the Trojans suffered large amount of casualties. That night, it was not as cheerful as the night before. Members from both groups were seated around the fire, discussing what to do next. Lewis mentioned that though the Trojans did lose many men, they would focus all their attention and units on defending the bridge. It was probable that all their remaining armed vehicles would be set up as well, whereas they did not have any left. Jennifer then suddenly had an idea. If they managed to steal the outfits of some Blue Trojan scouts, a few members could dress up as the enemy. Others would then pretend to be captured by them, and thus get escorted into their camp. Once inside, the pretended captives would gather any weapon they could find and help the dressed up members to destroy the camp from within. Omar liked this plan. It was ironic and almost poetic in the sense it resembled the way the actual Trojans were fooled by Odysseus. He agreed to the plan, but added that a simultaneous frontal assault would still be helpful, as the Trojans would be attacked from two sides. The group agreed to this as well and drank on it. Tomorrow would be a big day.